Good evening and welcome. You're with the News First, your number one news provider. I'm Shamir Rasooli.
And I'm Krishi Panditharatnam. We start off the news with a look at your headlines first.
24 countries vote in favor of the US resolution on Sri Lanka, while 15 countries vote against the resolution at the UNHRC. Minister of External Affairs, Professor G.L. Peris, thanks the countries that supported Sri Lanka. Suspects in the murder of two monks at the Kotte Raja Mahavihara produced before court.
The resolution on Sri Lanka tabled by the United States of America at the 19th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva was adopted today. 24 countries voted for the resolution while 15 voted against it. 8 countries abstained from voting.
24 countries voted in favor of the US-sponsored resolution on Sri Lanka at the United Nations Human Rights Council session today. The United States of America, India, Mauritius, Chile, Costa Rica, Peru, Uruguay, Austria, Belgium, Italy, Norway, Spain, Switzerland, Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Romania, Moldova, Benin, Cameroon, Libya, Nigeria, Guatemala and Mexico voted in favor of the resolution on Sri Lanka. Cuba, Russia, China, Maldives, Bangladesh, Mauritania, Congo, Uganda, Indonesia, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Thailand, Ecuador and Philippines voted against the resolution. 8 nations, namely Angola, Botswana, Burkina Faso, Senegal, Jordan, Kyrgyzstan, Malaysia and Djibouti abstained from voting.
The resolution on Sri Lanka tabled by the United States at the United Nations Human Rights Council session in Geneva encompasses 3 main clauses. The US resolution calls upon the government of Sri Lanka to implement the constructive recommendations made in the report of the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission and to take all the necessary additional steps to fulfill its legal obligations and commitments to initiate credible and independent actions to ensure justice, equity, accountability and reconciliation for all Sri Lankans. Secondly, the resolution requests the government of Sri Lanka to present as expeditiously as possible a comprehensive action plan detailing the steps that the government has taken and will take to implement the recommendations made in the Commission's report and also to address alleged violations of international law. The US resolution encourages the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and relevant special procedures mandate holders to provide, in consultation with and with the concurrence of the government of Sri Lanka, advice and technical assistance on implementing the above-mentioned steps. The resolution requests the Office of the High Commissioner to present a report on the provisions of such assistance to the Human Rights Council at its 22nd session.
U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Human Rights Council, Ellen Donahue, introduced the resolution on Sri Lanka at the 19th United Nations Human Rights Council session in Geneva this afternoon. Head of the Sri Lankan delegation, Minister Mahinda Samarasinghe, in his statement at the session, spelled out Sri Lanka's position on the resolution. Many country representatives also expressed their views on the resolution.
It is almost 3 years since the end of Sri Lanka's long and painful conflict. For these 3 years, Sri Lanka has had the time and space to develop its own roadmap for lasting national reconciliation and accountability. Most recently, we have encouraged Sri Lanka to address actions taken on both sides of the conflict through its domestic lesson learned and reconciliation commission process. An enduring peace will be unsustainable without meaningful steps to foster national reconciliation and accountability. Given the lack of action to implement the recommendations of the Sri Lankan government's own LLRC and the need for additional steps to address accountability issues not covered in the LLRC report, it is appropriate that the Human Rights Council consider and adopt this moderate and balanced resolution. To close, I wish to emphasize that this resolution is intended to help the people of Sri Lanka achieve a lasting and equitable peace.
We're talking about a period of 3 years. In 3 years ago, President Obama proposed closing the Guantanamo. He proposed closing it, but that has not been done. So I would ask our fellow co-sponsors if they would be open to postponing the consideration of the draft until September. In that way, we would avoid a situation that would seriously undermine the credibility and the legitimacy of our work.
The resolution has been the subject of open, transparent dialogue since well before this session began. If colleagues disagree with the text, they should just vote it up or down and not seek to stall the process. We ask other delegations to vote against the motion to adjourn the debate.
In the EU's view, genuine reconciliation among all groups and communities in Sri Lanka is essential and requires justice and accountability for past events. By co-sponsoring this resolution, the EU fully places itself behind calls on the government of Sri Lanka to act expeditiously to implement the constructive recommendation of the LLRC, as well as to fulfill its legal obligations with regard to alleged violations of international law.
What Sri Lanka is facing is national reconciliation, consolidation of peace, and developing its economy. It is beyond the mandate of the Human Rights Council. Sri Lanka is a very friendly developing country. What it requires now is friendly assistance of the international community rather than a resolution of this nature from the Human Rights Council. Draft Resolution L2 attempts to interfere in the national reconciliation process and internal affairs of Sri Lanka. It is against the purpose and principles of the United Nations Charter and the norms of international relations.
Regarding the issue of sovereignty and the interference in the domestic affairs of another country, for my delegation, as far as human rights are concerned, we believe that the Human Rights Council, of course, has competence in this area and has some responsibility in this area, not only where Sri Lanka is concerned, but also in any other member country of this council. That is why Mexico will vote in favor of the resolution. Thank you.
The Maldives understands that in order to rebuild, there must be accountability for all violations of human rights committed by all sides in the war and justice and redress for victims. It is also important to look forward to promote reconciliation for all Sri Lankans and to create a better, fairer and more equitable society. The Maldives believes that the LLRC report before us sets a framework for securing these steps. However, we believe the resolution before us, orally revised, is not necessary at the present juncture, and that Sri Lanka should be given the time, space and support it needs to implement the LLRC recommendations.
A democratic country like Sri Lanka has to be provided time and space to achieve the objectives of reconciliation and peace. In this Council, we have the responsibility to ensure that our conclusions do contribute to this objective rather than hinder it. In conclusion, Madam, as a neighbour with thousands of years of cordial relations with Sri Lanka, with deep-rooted spiritual and cultural ties, we cannot remain untouched by the developments in that country. We have been bound also by a shared quest for freedom and dignity. We will continue to remain engaged with the government of Sri Lanka to take forward the process of reconciliation to secure for all its citizens a future marked by equality, dignity, justice and self-respect.
Russia is convinced that the process of a national reconciliation in Sri Lanka must be carried out by Sri Lankans. Attempts at external interference in this process are counterproductive and inadmissible. The government of Sri Lanka has done much for national reconciliation. These efforts must be encouraged. We must not try to make hasty and ill-founded judgments.
Madam President, many in this Council would agree that Sri Lanka has been a role model of consistently and unambiguously engaging with everyone in the Council, not just on this occasion but over the years. Despite this exemplary interaction, Sri Lanka has been selectively targeted by certain countries at the behest of some whom we believe still bear resentment at the clear and decisive decision taken at the special session of 2009. This attempt to undermine the resolution of 2009 is unacceptable, especially because of the continuing improvement in Sri Lanka during the intervening period. Those who live in glass houses, Madam President, are best advised to exercise caution before throwing stones. After 30 long years of instability and violence, we have achieved stability and peace. We need to be given time to further consolidate the clear progress that has been achieved in a short period of 3 years. We are clearly justified in asserting that we require time to realize comprehensive reconciliation. In respect of Sri Lanka's situation, it is barely 3 months and not 3 years, Madam President, since the presentation of the Domestic Mechanisms report. Shouldn't we be given the time and space to continue this process of implementation and of reconciliation without undue interference? Furthermore, this resolution, if adopted, would undermine the principle of non-interference in matters within the domestic jurisdiction of a country. This resolution, if adopted, will not add value to the implementation process in Sri Lanka. On the contrary, it may well be counterproductive, and as such, those who have been using extreme pressure tactics in garnering support for this ill-timed and unwarranted initiative should be mindful of the responsibility that accompanies it. Let me assure you, Madam President, that the government of Sri Lanka will spare no effort to safeguard the sovereignty and independence of the motherland.
With the U.S. resolution on Sri Lanka being adopted by the UNHRC this afternoon, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton released a statement. Clinton says that the U.S., together with the international community, sent a strong signal that Sri Lanka will only achieve lasting peace through real reconciliation and accountability, and the international community stands ready to help. The U.S. Secretary of State noted that they look forward to the implementation of the recommendations made in the LLRC report and take the necessary measures to address accountability issues. She added that the U.S. is looking forward to discussing future action with the Minister of External Affairs, Professor G.L. Peiris, shortly.
Now, Minister of External Affairs Professor G.L. Peiris says that it is a matter of great satisfaction that 15 countries voted with Sri Lanka at the United Nations Human Rights Council despite the intense pressure exerted on them in many forms. The minister made this comment in a statement that was issued on conclusion of voting that at the UNHRC on the UN draft resolution on Sri Lanka.
In his statement, the Minister of External Affairs, Professor G.L. Peiris, sincerely thanked the 15 countries that voted against the resolution and the 8 countries which, by abstaining, declined to support the resolution. Minister G.L. Peiris notes that many countries which voted with Sri Lanka were conscious of the danger of setting a precedent which enables ad hoc intervention by powerful countries in the internal affairs of other nations. The minister also states that this was a highly selective and arbitrary process which was not governed by objective norms or criteria of any kind.